They say that the best sketchbook is the one you have with you. For me, that sketchbook is the pocket notebook. I have some bigger sketchbooks, but they're just too bulky for me to carry around. I always have a pocket notebook and I use them for everything. But these little guys can definitely use a cover. They're basically torn to shreds by the time I write in the last page. I love that every brand of pocket notebooks is exactly the same size and you can find them everywhere. Another reason to make a cover for one of these little guys, rather than some obscure sized fancy sketchbook. So let's get making. I started by making a simple paper template with lots of room around the edges. The notebook cover is made from 5 to 6 ounce veg tan leather. I laid the paper template on top of the leather and carefully cut out a rectangle using a ruler and rotary cutter. The inner flaps that hold the notebook itself are made out of 1 to 2 ounce leather. This is about the thickness you would use to make a wallet. To ensure the notebook cover would fold properly, I had to remove some thickness from the spine. This process is called skiving, and I used Handy Leather's Super Skiver to do it. This is usually a really tedious process, but this time, I realized that if I bend the notebook cover backwards, I can skive way faster and more effectively than I can on a flat surface. I was so excited when I figured this out that I skived right through the leather. Nothing to do but cut a new piece of leather and start over. This time, I skived the spine on top of progressively larger objects until I was confident enough to try again with the leather bent backwards over itself. Except this time, I was much more careful. In the end, I got a deep channel that lets the cover fold perfectly in half. Maybe this is the way I was supposed to be skiving all along. At this point, I was ready to start the leather carving, and I knew I wanted to incorporate the hand outline from the Yellron blog logo. I actually drew that outline off of a picture of my hand. For the carving, I traced that original picture because I thought it would be interesting to include the lifelines and wrinkles from the palm of my hand. It was really hard to see my hand wrinkles through the tracing paper, so I only traced a few of them, figuring I could carve the rest freehand by just looking at the palm of my hand in real life. Before carving the leather, I soaked it with water and gave it some time to dry. Wetting the leather before carving is necessary, but allowing it to dry out a fair bit gives you nice, crisp carving lines. On the other hand, carving really wet leather gives you more mushy, ill-defined lines. I used a dulled nail to transfer the hand outline to the damp leather and then got to carving. I do all my carving with one of the cheaper craft tool swivel knives. I get great results with this swivel knife, and I'll have a link for it in the description, as well as links for all the other tools I used in this project. If you're looking to get started in leather carving, doing a simple outline like this is a great beginner project. Your skills develop fast just by following a curved shape, and ending up with a clean, smooth line is really satisfying and a great confidence builder. It's hard to know where exactly the idea for the eye came from. I think my inspiration was some combination of Kyler Brown's leather carving, the Pale Man from Pan's Labyrinth, and the ancient symbol of the Hamsa hand. Wherever the idea came from, when it popped into my head, I immediately knew it was right. I had a lot of fun adapting the wrinkles in my hand to accommodate an eyeball, but I'm really sad to say that I lost the footage of carving the eye and the hand wrinkles. This was a cool process, but you can get the gist of it from the final result. And for a final touch of personalization, I carved my initials on the back of the notebook cover. With the carving done, I was ready to dye the piece. I wanted the hand and eye to look realistic, so I carefully painted the dye around the hand since the natural color of the leather is pretty close to my skin tone. It's a little tricky to apply leather dye evenly with a paintbrush. It's a lot easier when you're using the big wool daubers like I did on the rest of the notebook cover. So, despite my best attempts, the color tone around the hand has a bit more, shall we say, texture than it does on the rest of the piece. This actually creates kind of a cool effect, where it looks like the hand is surrounded by a sort of halo or haze. Before applying the overall dye, I wet the rest of the journal cover with water. This process is called casing and opens up the pores in the leather, allowing it to absorb dye more evenly than dry leather. I did 4 coats overall, applying the dye in every direction to minimize uneven streaks. I did a final pass around the hand with a paintbrush since the dye here was still a little light. Rubbing the dyed leather with a cloth removes any excess pigments that didn't get absorbed. I repeated this process for the 2 inner flaps. With the overall dyeing done, I was ready to add some life to the eye. I started by using some light blue dye to color the iris. I painted this on in radial streaks, and by layering the dye, I was able to get a pretty cool effect. Next, I made pink by mixing a few drops of red dye with white leather paint. This went on the tear duct and the tip of the lower eyelid. I used the white Angelus leather paint by itself to color in the white of the eye. I colored the pupil with black edge coat. As its name suggests, this stuff is made for leather edges, but I found it works great to paint the grain side of leather as well. This next part was really exciting. I added some complexity and tint to the iris by painting radial streaks with white and smudging it with the dry side of the brush. This added a ton of life to the eye. I used more of the black edge coat to add eyelashes. I also wanted to accent my initials with some painting. I didn't have a clear vision of how I wanted this to look, but I just started outlining the letters in white. I'm painting directly in the carving here, and it was really hard to do this cleanly. It's a lot easier to paint between the carvings where the leather is raised. So to clean things up, I filled in the letters with black. Adding the black really made the letters pop. While painting the letters, I decided the eye needed a little glint of light for that extra touch of life. And because I'm a perfectionist, I added more pink to the tip of the eyelid and to the tear duct. Dyeing leather strips it of its natural oils, so I applied neatsfoot oil to restore this moisture. I left the pieces for about half a day so that the leather could evenly absorb the oil. Then, I finished the pieces with Carnauba cream. This is a natural wax finish, and honestly, it makes your leatherwork smell incredible. You just wipe it on, allow to dry, and then buff to a sheen. I repeated this process for 2 total coats. In preparation for attaching the inner flaps to the cover, I marked the areas where I needed to apply contact cement. I was really careful to keep the contact cement in a thin strip around the border. The last notebook cover I made was a really tight fit, so I was super diligent throughout this project to make sure that a pocket notebook slides comfortably into the cover. Once the contact cement was dry to the touch, I aligned the pieces and pressed them together. Since I'm only human, the pieces didn't align perfectly. So to save some time sanding, I trimmed the more dramatically misaligned edges flush with a razor blade. To round over the corners, I chamfered them at 45 degrees and then smoothed them into a curve with 120 grit sandpaper. I gave the rest of the edges a quick sanding as well to make sure they were all flush. When you sand the edge of a piece of leather, you create a lip that protrudes over the grain side. I remove this lip with my edge beveler. Beveling the edges also prepares them for burnishing. Next, I established a stitch line around the border of the notebook cover with my edge groover. In hindsight, I should have done this before dyeing the leather. Since the edge groover removes material, the stitch line is noticeably lighter in color than the rest of the notebook cover. In the end, the stitches mostly cover the line, but next time I'm definitely going to create the edge groove before dyeing the leather. I could have dyed the stitching groove after making it, like I'm doing here with the edges, but I think this would have been finicky at best and sloppy looking at worst. I wanted the stitching on this to be nice and consistent, so I used my awl to punch stitching holes in each corner and then worked inwards from the corners when I punched the rest of the stitching holes. That way, I could hide any misalignments in spacing in the middle of each side while the corners would always look dead on. I gave my thread a healthy coat of beeswax and then got to saddle stitching. I really enjoy the process of saddle stitching. Since consistent motions are essentially the key, I find saddle stitching really meditative and satisfying. At the end of the stitch line, I tied off the thread on the inside of the cover, cut the excess, coated the knot with beeswax, and sort of smushed the knot together by tapping it with my mallet. I gave all of the stitches a few taps, which flattens them against the leather. And with that, I was ready for the final step of edge burnishing. I wet the edges with water and then got to work with my trusty old burnisher. Once I had a pretty good shine going, I rubbed the edges with beeswax and then did a second round of burnishing. This basically melts the beeswax onto the edges. When I burnish a piece, I like to work through all of the notches on the tool regardless of the leather thickness. This ensures that the tool makes contact with the entire cross-section of the edge. I like ending on the smallest notch just to eliminate any lip or flare that's built up during burnishing. Since making this notebook cover, I have had it with me constantly. Everything about it just makes me want to take it out of my pocket and use it. The color, the fact that it's the perfect size, the carnauba cream giving it that rich finish and feel in your hand, the polished edges, and of course, the hand and the eye carving. So considering the goal of this project was to make me want to carry and use a sketchbook, I'm going to call this a roaring success. Thank you for watching, and be sure to check out the rest of my channel. I have lots of other videos about making all sorts of stuff. I'll have links to all of the tools and materials from this project in the description, as well as a link to my Patreon if you're interested in supporting me there. Thanks again and have a great day.